The sea stretched endlessly, in every direction, its soft waves lapping rhythmically against the jagged rocks below the cliff. The sky was painted in strokes of lavender and gold, the last light of evening reflecting gently off the water like liquid amber. At the very edge of the world, where time seemed to slow and silence became sacred, stood an old lighthouse, its white tower, slightly weather-worn but still proud, rose like a sentinel above the sea. The lantern room, high above, held the light that had for decades guided sailors safely through storm and darkness. And within that tower, nestled between the spiral stairs and old wooden floors, lived an old man named Elias. Elias was the lighthouse keeper, and he had been for as long as he could remember. Each day, Elias would wake to the soft cries of gulls and the gentle hush of waves. He'd climb the narrow spiral staircase with deliberate slowness, feeling the familiar touch of the banisters, smooth wood beneath his hand. He moved like a man with nowhere to rush, and that was exactly how he liked it. Tonight, as the sun dipped low and shadows danced across the sea, Ilya sat in his favorite rocking chair just outside the lighthouse door. The chair creaked softly beneath him as he watched the horizon, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of chamomile tea. The scent of it mixed with the salt in the air. He breathed deeply, letting the warmth settle in his chest. Behind him, the lighthouse gears slowly turned, and the great lantern flickered to life. Its golden beams swept across the sea, a quiet promise to any ships drifting nearby. You're not alone, but there were no ships tonight. Only the wind, only the waves, only Elias. He liked it that way. The truth was, Elias had once lived a life far from the sea, full of noise, of people, of expectations. He had worn suits and ties, shaken hands in city towers, dined in loud restaurants, but none of it had ever felt like home. One day, long ago, a letter had arrived. No name, just a wax seal in the shape of a seashell. Inside, a single sentence: "Return to where your soul was born." He hadn't known what it meant, but he remembered the summers of his boyhood, visiting his grandfather, who once tended this very lighthouse. He remembered the smell of salt, the warmth of the lantern room, and the stories whispered in the dark dot. So, he came back. That was 32 years ago, and not a day had passed that he'd regretted it. As twilight deepened, Elias lit a small oil lamp beside him. Its amber glow cast soft shadows across the stone porch. He opened a leather-bound book, one of many old journals he'd kept over the years. Tonight, he flipped to a page he hadn't read in a long time. "Somewhere beyond the waves, I believe. The sea remembers. I whisper my thoughts to her, and she whispers secrets back." He smiled at the line. He couldn't recall when he'd written it. Maybe during a stormy night, or perhaps one of those still, fog-wrapped mornings where even the birds seemed to sleep. The sea was more than water to Elias. It was a companion, a keeper of memories, a listener, and he had begun, in his quiet way, to believe it, listened more than most people ever had. The wind shifted. It grew a little cooler, a little softer, as if the sea had exhaled. The waves slowed their song. Somewhere in the distance, a whale surfaced, its call low and haunting, echoing across the water like a lullaby meant for the stars. Elias closed his eyes and let the sound wash over him. His body sank deeper into the chair, the tension of years, dissolving like foam on the tide. He could feel sleep coming, not as an interruption, but as a gentle visitor, welcomed, trusted, just before he drifted off. He heard a faint whisper, carried not by voice, but by feeling. Tomorrow, something will change. He didn't open his eyes. He didn't need to dot. Elias had lived enough to know, sometimes. The sea tells you something before your mind is ready to understand, and so, with that final thought, he let himself fall, not into worry, not into fear, but into sleep. Soft, still, safe. The lighthouse beam turned gently above, painting arcs of gold through the foggy night, as the sea kept her ancient watch, and the old man dreamed. The morning arrived, not with a burst, but with a breath. Soft light slipped through the lace curtains of Elias's bedroom, like shy fingers tapping gently on the windowsill. The sea, calm and silver blue, mirrored the sky above, where clouds drifted lazily like forgotten thoughts. The scent of seaweed, damp stone, and wildflowers crept in with the breeze, wrapping the room in a soft and familiar hug. Elias opened his eyes slowly. The dream still lingered, not in detail, but in feeling like a melody heard in childhood, and half remembered in old age. Something was different. He sat up, his feet touching the cool wooden floor. The old lighthouse groaned slightly as the morning wind pushed gently against its tower. Like a child waking an elder, Elias stood, stretched, and walked to the window. The sea blinked back at him, silent, vast, UNMOVING, but something in the air felt like a whisper. After dressing in his usual wool sweater and linen trousers, Elias descended the spiral staircase. The metal steps clinked faintly beneath his feet, a rhythm he'd known so long, he no longer thought about it. He brewed tea in the small kitchen with practiced grace, each movement quiet and intentional, like a monk preparing for morning prayer. With the cup in hand, he stepped outside. The porch was damp with dew. A lone gull circled overhead, then disappeared into the horizon. He sipped the tea. The wind, soft and fragrant, carried the low murmur of waves against the rocks. Then he heard it, a sound like a sigh, not from the sea, not from the sky, but from below. He leaned forward, setting his cup down. There it was again, faint, gentle, as if the ocean had taken a breath, and then a whisper, not in words, but in emotion, a pull. Elias had never been one for superstition, but he believed in energy in the way the world speaks, not with voices, but with vibrations. Over the years, he'd come to feel the moods of the ocean like one feels a change in weather. And today, the ocean felt curious. He walked down the rocky path to the edge of the cliff, where the waves curled gently, like fingers brushing the earth. Kneeling carefully, he placed one hand on the stone, his fingertips brushing the tide's edge. A bubble rose, popped, another followed. Then silence. He waited, and suddenly, as if summoned from the deep, something floated to the surface. Small and wooden dot. Elias stepped back as the object came closer, carried by the waves until it nudged the rocks. It was a box, old, weather-worn, bound in rusted metal corners, and covered in sea moss. Elias reached for it, slowly. The moment his fingers touched the lid, he felt a strange calm, as though the sea had exhaled. He carried the box carefully back to the lighthouse. Inside, at his writing desk, Elias cleaned the box with gentle hands. There was no lock, no name, just a simple carving on top, a circle, a wave, a star. He opened the lid. Inside was a folded piece of parchment, and a shell, perfectly white, spiral-shaped, and humming softly in the quiet. Elias unfolded the paper. The ink was faded, the handwriting elegant and flowing. If you've found this, then you've listened. The sea holds more than tides. Return the shell to where the sky meets the deep. And wait. He stared at the words. Who wrote them? When? Why? But more than curiosity was peace. The message didn't feel like a command. It felt like a gift. That night, Elias stood once more on the porch. The stars had bloomed across the sky. Soft and slow, the lighthouse beams circled silently. He held the shell in his palm, warm from his touch, cool from the sea. He whispered into the wind, not with words, just with hope, and far below, the sea answered, not in thunder, but in lullaby. The box, the message, the feeling. None of it frightened him, because Elias had long since learned, when the sea speaks, you listen, and when you're still enough, it whispers secrets the world has forgotten. He placed the shell by his bedside, its spiral catching the moonlight, and as he drifted into sleep, the waves carried his dreams far from the shore, to where stars touch water, and memories become melody. The next morning, Elias awoke, not to the cry of gulls, or the moan of the sea, but to silence, the kind of silence that feels thick, like a velvet curtain drawn across the sky. He blinked slowly, noticing the soft grayness of the morning light, seeping in through the curtains. Everything in the room seemed the same, yet not quite. The air was still, the scent of salt had been replaced by something more earthy, something like lavender, and wet grass. Elias rose and noticed the shell on his bedside table was gone. In its place was a single blue flower, petals glowing faintly, as if touched by starlight. He stepped outside. The lighthouse, still perched proudly on the cliff, was surrounded by the usual rocks, the gentle slope, and the open sky. But there, behind the lighthouse, where there had always been only brambles and stones, was something new. A garden. Not just any garden, a hidden one. Its boundaries were soft and undefined, like a dream remembered in fragments. There were plants Elias had never seen before, flowers shaped like bells, leaves that shimmered like moonlight on water, and vines that whispered when the breeze touched them. At the center was an old wooden bench, and sitting on it, was the shell. Elias walked forward, gently brushing his fingers against the petals as he passed. The air here hummed like a lullaby sung from beneath the soil. Each step felt lighter, as if time itself were bending to allow his passage. When he reached the bench, he picked up the shell and sat. The moment he did, the wind stirred, and with it came a memory. But it wasn't his own, it was a memory of someone. Someone from long ago. A child, laughing as they chased a gull across the rocks. A woman humming an old song while hanging laundry in the sun. A man writing a letter he'd never sent. The garden was not just a place of beauty, it was a keeper of time. Elias closed his eyes and listened. The shell, now resting in his palm again, pulsed with a gentle warmth. From deep within it, a whisper rose, not in words, but in feeling. Time is not lost, only left behind. He thought of all the years he had spent in solitude, of the people he had loved, and the ones he had lost, of the world outside this lighthouse that moved so quickly, always chasing, always rushing. But here within this garden, time moved like a river in sleep. And suddenly, He understood. This garden had always been here, waiting for someone still enough to find it. He remained on the bench for what felt like hours, or maybe it was only minutes. In the garden of forgotten time, such things didn't matter. There was only the breath of the earth, the shimmer of the leaves, and the heartbeat of the sea beyond. When he finally rose, the shell glowed brighter. It was ready, but for what? He did not yet know. That night, Elias stood at the edge of the garden and looked back at the lighthouse. Its light swept gently across the horizon, guiding no ships, but marking his place in the world. He held the shell close to his chest, not for answers, but for the comfort of connection, of knowing the world held mysteries, not to be solved, but to be cherished. And as he lay in bed, lulled once more by the hush of the sea and the scent of lavender drifting through the open window, he knew the shell had more to show him. The sea had more to say, and the journey was only just beginning. The sky that evening wore a cloak of soft indigo. The lighthouse's gentle glow reached out into the darkness, pulsing slowly. Like the breath of a sleeping giant, Elias stood at the balcony once more, shell in hand. He wasn't sure why, but he felt it. Something was coming. The wind shifted, and with it came a low, melodic hum. Not a storm. Not the usual song of the sea. But something older, something that spoke. He raised the shell to his ear, and then, for the first time since he found it, he heard a voice. It wasn't loud, it wasn't clear, but it was gentle, like someone speaking underwater or through a dream. Elias, ... do you remember? He almost dropped the shell. The voice, so soft, yet unmistakably familiar, echoed, not just in his ear, but in his heart. It was a woman's voice, kind, calm, with a tone that carried both sadness and warmth. Elias closed his eyes. Suddenly, he saw her face, not clearly, but as a silhouette in the light of memory. A woman with long hair dancing in the ocean breeze, her eyes reflecting starlight. His mother. He hadn't remembered her voice in years. How could the shell know? That night, sleep came slowly, but when it did, it carried Elias into a dream more vivid than any before. He was walking through the same garden he'd found that morning, but it was larger now, with new paths and glowing stones that marked the way forward. He followed them. The air was filled with the same hum from earlier, as though the world itself were humming a lullaby. And then, beneath a weeping willow made of silver leaves, he saw her. His mother. She didn't speak. She just smiled, and when she opened her arms, Elias felt safe, young, and whole in a way he hadn't felt since. He was a child. He awoke just before dawn, tears on his face, but he was smiling. He rose, went outside, and found the wind still humming. The garden swayed gently in the morning light. The birds hadn't returned, but a white feather sat on the bench, where the shell had been. He picked it up, and from within the wind came the whisper again. "You are not alone, Elias. You never were." That morning, for the first time in decades, Elias brewed tea for two. He placed a second cup on the table beside him and watched the sunrise slowly over the ocean, painting the waves gold. Maybe it was silly, maybe it was just a dream, but in that quiet moment, he felt something else at the table. A presence, not haunting, but comforting, and in the soft wind that blew through the garden, he heard it once more, a voice, like wind through tall grass, whispering, "I'm always with you." Elias sat in silence for a long time, the feather in his hand, the shell resting on the table. Something inside him had shifted. This was no ordinary lighthouse, and he was no longer just a keeper of lights. He was a keeper of memories, and memories, it seemed, had a life of their own. The morning sun filtered gently through the gauzy curtains, painting the wooden floor with golden stripes of light. Elias sat at the breakfast table, the steaming teapot beside him and a single white feather resting near the cup he'd placed. Across from his own, the shell sat quietly beside the tea, as if waiting for something outside. The garden danced softly in the morning breeze, its vines swaying like sleepy dancers rising at dawn. The hum in the wind remained, no longer eerie, but comforting, like a lullaby only he could hear. He wasn't sure what today would bring, but something inside him, deep and instinctive, knew he had to follow the signs. After breakfast, Elias wandered through the lighthouse, pausing by the worn staircase that led up to the light. The wood creaked softly beneath his steps, like it was whispering old secrets. He ran his hand along the walls, worn smooth by time and storms, as he descended. Again, his fingers brushed against a loose floorboard. He froze. It had always been there, the faint line between the boards. But today it felt different, as though it were calling to him. He knelt, gently pressing on it. With a soft sigh, the board lifted. Beneath it, nestled in dust and the scent of cedarwood, lay a faded envelope tied with a thin, pale blue ribbon. Elias picked it up carefully, almost reverently. The paper was fragilely loaded with age, but the handwriting was unmistakable. "To my dearest son Elias, in case I cannot return." His heart caught. He sat by the window where the ocean stretched endlessly beyond, the letter in his lap. The breeze brushed his face like a mother's hand, and for a moment he closed his eyes. Then, slowly, he untied the ribbon and unfolded the paper. The writing was elegant, looping softly like the waves. My sweet Elias, if you are reading this, it means the winds have kept me from you, or time has taken me beyond the reach of this world. But I want you to know my love for you was never lost at sea. It lives in the shell you found, in the light of the tower, and in the lullabies of the wind. Ilias's hands trembled. I brought you here when you were just a boy, hoping the lighthouse would protect you, even if I could not. I had to leave because there were things I could not explain, then secrets I hoped the sea would forgive. But this place, it holds magic, Elias, not the kind in fairy tales, but a gentler magic, a healing kind, the kind that whispers to the lonely and sings to the weary. You are not just its keeper, you are its heart. When the time is right, the shell will sing, and through it, I will speak. I love you, always. Remember, the wind carries more than weather. It carries memory. It carries me, your mother. A single tear slipped down Ilias's cheek. Not from sadness, but from the soft, overwhelming peace that the letter gave him. It was as if a puzzle had finally been completed after decades of missing pieces. He understood now why he'd never left, why the lighthouse never felt lonely, even on the quietest nights. It was not just a structure of stone and wood. It was a vessel of love. He sat with the letter in his hands for a long while, letting the words seep into the corners of his soul. Outside, the waves whispered against the rocks below, like a chorus of lullabies sung to the world. He tucked the letter back into its envelope, wrapped the blue ribbon around it once more, and placed it gently in a wooden box carved with seashells. Then, something unexpected happened. The shell on the table shimmered faintly just for a moment, and released a soft, chiming tone. Not loud, not intrusive, just a note. Like a memory taking its first breath. Elias smiled. He placed the shell against his ear, and this time he heard her voice clearly. You found it. I'm proud of you, Elias. Now let it guide you. That night, the sky turned a deeper shade of velvet. Stars blinked gently above, like quiet sentinels watching from afar. The lighthouse beam swept slowly across the sea, not searching but welcoming. Inside, Ilias lit a single lantern and sat by the fireplace. He whispered softly to the wind, "Thank you for waiting for me." The wind answered in kind with a warm sigh through the chimney, as if saying, "I never left." And so the keeper of the lighthouse didn't feel alone anymore, because within its walls lived memory. And memory, it turned out, was the most sacred kind of light. The moon had begun its gentle climb across the sky, draping the sea in silver. Inside the lighthouse, everything was still except for the soft ticking of the old brass clock above the fireplace. Elias sat in his armchair, the shell resting quietly. In his hand, its soft glow slowly fading like the setting sun. His mother's voice still echoed in his memory, not as a haunting, but as a lullaby outside. The night breeze beckoned. There was something waiting. He stepped out onto the wooden porch, where the cool air kissed his skin and the scent of night. Jasmine drifted up from the path below. The garden, which had once been little more than wild grass, had begun to change. Something in the wind had nurtured it, and now it bloomed like a secret painting hidden beneath dust. For too long a narrow trail led from the lighthouse to the garden's heart. He walked slowly, each step falling in rhythm with the quiet of the world. His boots crunched gently against the earth, and the stars blinked overhead, following him like a quiet audience. The garden, once tangled and forgotten, had become something else entirely. Lush ferns brushed his fingertips as he passed. Pale white roses, ghostly and beautiful, swayed gently under the moonlight. Their petals shimmered like frost in moonbeams, and their fragrance was faint but enchanting. Like a memory you can almost remember. In the center stood a stone bench beneath an old olive tree. Elias sat, and for a moment, everything stilled. The only sounds were soft. The rustle of leaves, the slow exhale of the sea beyond the cliff, and the occasional chirp of a sleepy cricket. But then, something changed. Not abruptly, not with fanfare. Just a subtle shift, like the beginning of a dream. The garden around him sighed. Petals stirred, though there was no breeze. The earth felt warm beneath his feet. And above, the sky seemed closer than before, as if the stars had leaned in too. Listen, he closed his eyes and dreamed. He found himself still in the garden, but the flowers had multiplied. Now they stretched for miles, glowing faintly in shades of lavender, pale gold, and soft indigo. A path of floating lanterns drifted in, the air guiding him deeper into this dreaming world. A voice came, not spoken aloud, but whispered within. This garden remembers you. Elias looked around. The olive tree had grown taller. In its branches, small lights twinkled like fireflies with memories. The wind carried melodies now, lullabies made of earth and sky, and then he saw them dot figures, walking quietly through the flowers, not frightening, not ghostly but serene. Some he recognized from old portraits and village tales. Others felt familiar only in feeling, not in form. They were dreamers, just like him, keepers of light. listeners of wind, guardians of memory. One of them stepped forward, a woman in a pale blue dress, her hair braided with moonlight. She smiled, and Elias knew it was her. They didn't speak with words, their eyes did the talking. The embrace was like a breeze wrapping around him, safe and warm, and in that embrace, Elias understood. This garden was not just a garden. It was the resting place of peaceful thoughts, of kind memories, and of all the love left unspoken, a sanctuary for the soul. Back in the waking world, Elias slowly opened his eyes. He was still on the bench. The garden was quiet again, but different. Now, warmer, more alive. The roses had tilted their faces toward him. The ferns had grown thicker. Somewhere in the distance, a wind chime played a tune he didn't remember hanging in his lap. The shell pulsed once with soft, silvery light, and in that moment, he didn't feel alone at all. He rose and made his way back toward the lighthouse. The path now gently glowing beneath his feet as if the earth itself remembered the dream at the door. He paused, looked back. The garden glowed faintly in the distance. A garden of dreams, now wide awake. That night, as he lay in bed, the shell resting beside him, Elias drifted into sleep with a peaceful heart. Not because he had found all the answers, but because he had discovered where to look. Inside himself, inside the wind, inside the garden, and as sleep embraced him, a soft voice whispered once more, "Rest easy, Elias, you are never truly alone." The night air had changed. What was once still and fragrant had become thick with clouds. Like a blanket drawn over a sleepy world, from the window of the lighthouse, Elias watched the sky darken, not with fear, but with a quiet kind of reverence. He had seen many storms before, but this one felt different. This storm wasn't angry. It wasn't loud. It was thoughtful, like the sky was remembering something. A low rumble rolled across the sea, not sharp, but soft and round, like a deep breath. Taken in the distance, the waves below answered, sighing gently against the rocks. There was no rush, no panic, just nature, moving slowly. In rhythm with the night, inside the lighthouse glowed. Candles flickered behind glass, casting slow-moving shadows on the stone walls. The fire in the hearth was a small one tonight, more for comfort than heat. Elias wrapped a shawl around his shoulders, made from the wool of an old sheep he had once cared for. He smiled, remembering the way it used to follow him around the yard. Like a curious cloud, he sat back in his chair and listened. The first raindrops arrived like a lullaby. They tapped gently on the glass, as if the sky was knocking softly to be let in. Elias didn't move. He didn't need to. The lighthouse was built for weather like this, built to withstand it. To hold the light steady when the world blurred with mist and water. He closed his eyes. Each raindrop became a note in a quiet melody. Each rumble of thunder was a drum, far off in the distance. The wind whispered between the cracks of the windows, like a flute, trying to remember a tune. It was a song the earth had sung for centuries. And as he listened, Elias drifted, not fully asleep, not fully awake. Somewhere in the in-between, a peaceful place, where thoughts move like slow rivers. In that soft space, the lighthouse faded, and the world became fluid. He was standing on the beach now, barefoot, the sand warm, even as the rain fell. The sea stretched endlessly before him, calm but deep. Like a mind at rest. Lightning danced gently across the horizon, not flashing, but glowing in soft waves, like silk being pulled through the sky. And from the sea came a voice, not sharp, not commanding, just there. Even the storm sleeps sometimes. Elias walked toward the water. Each step left no footprint, as if the earth was lifting him instead of holding him. The rain didn't soak his skin. It kissed it cool, soothing, healing. He felt something in his chest loosen. A knot that had been there for years. A quiet fear of being forgotten, of being small, of being alone. But the storm whispered otherwise. You are part of everything. He looked up. The clouds were no longer dark. They shimmered with shades of deep blue and silver. And above them, stars peeked through, like old friends smiling through a veil. The wind grew gentle again. The thunder slowed. The rain began to thin, and Elias felt peace spread through his limbs, like warmth from the hearth. He sat down on the sand, the sea humming quietly beside him. There was no need to move, no need to answer. Just be in the real world. Elias stirred slightly in his chair. The storm outside was already passing. Rain had turned to mist. The thunder was a memory now, fading gently over the sea. But something inside him had changed, not loudly, not dramatically. Just enough. He stood, stretched slowly, and walked to the door. Outside, the earth was damp and glowing. Each leaf sparkled with droplets. Each stone looked polished by the rain. The air smelled like clean hope. He stepped into the garden. The white roses had drooped gently under the rain's touch, their petals more fragrant than ever. The path shimmered with tiny reflections of the stars above. as if the heavens had spilled their light across the ground. Elias walked slowly among them, and as he reached the olive tree, he placed his hand on its damp bark. It was warm, alive. The kind of warmth that doesn't come from the sun, but from within. "Thank you," he whispered, not to anyone in particular, but to the world itself. For the quiet, for the tears, for the storm, for reminding him that sometimes, even silence speaks. That night, Elias finally returned to bed. He placed the shell on the table beside him. Its glow was faint now, pulsing in sync with his breath. He lay back, pulled the blanket up to his chin, and exhaled slowly. Outside, the lighthouse stood watch. The sea was quiet. The storm had passed. And inside, a man slept deeply, not because the world was perfect, but because he had made peace with its imperfections, and in his dreams, rain still fell, but always gently, always beautifully. The morning after the storm arrived like a sigh. A soft, silver fog rested over the cliffs, and the lighthouse stood tall and calm, like an old friend who had stayed up all night to watch over the sea. Elias stirred in his bed, the linen blanket still wrapped around him, warm and gently rumpled from a night of deep dream-filled sleep. A seagull called in the distance, not sharply, but more like a greeting. The world had been rinsed clean. Elias rose slowly, without hurry. His bare feet touched the wooden floor, cool and smooth like polished stone. He moved with the grace of someone who had long since learned there was no need to rush. Outside his window, the horizon was beginning to stretch, painting the sky in soft strokes of peach and lavender. He smiled and whispered to himself, "Another quiet miracle." The kettle was already halfway full. The fire, still warm from the night before, welcomed him like an old companion. Soon, the comforting scent of herbal tea filled the room, mingling with the fresh sea air. And then he saw it. It was near the edge of the path, just past the white rose bush. A small glass bottle, caught gently between two stones, its cork still firmly in place. Sunlight gleamed off the glass, and something inside shimmered, something rolled, something written. Elias felt no jolt of surprise. Instead, he felt understanding, as if this had always been part of the day, as if the sea had simply remembered something it wanted him to know. He bent down slowly and picked it up. The glass was cool, the shape curved like a smooth river stone. Inside, a piece of parchment waited patiently. Back inside, Elias set the bottle on the table beside his cup of tea, He admired it for a long moment, how perfectly it had traveled, how deliberately it had arrived. Then, with care, he pulled the cork and slid out the tiny scroll. The paper was old, soft at the edges, but the ink was clear and flowing. There was no name, no date, just a simple message, written in delicate hand. When the world feels heavy, find the light you carry. You are not the storm, you are the lighthouse. Elias closed his eyes. The words weren't new to him. They were familiar, as if they had been whispered in the wind many times before, and only now put to paper. He folded the message gently and held it to his chest. Later that morning, he walked the shoreline. The tide was low, and the sand was wet beneath his feet, cool and velvety. Pieces of driftwood dotted the beach like forgotten stories. Small shells, still glistening, curled up along the edges like sleeping sea creatures. Above, the clouds drifted like silk. The world didn't speak loudly here. It didn't demand anything. It simply existed like a lullaby without words. Elias thought about the message. You are not the storm, you are the lighthouse. He had weathered many things: loneliness, long nights, questions that never seemed to answer themselves. But through it all, he had remained a quiet keeper of light, not just for ships, but for memories, for dreams, for the peace he had promised himself. Long ago he found a smooth rock and sat. The waves crept close, not to threaten, but to say hello. A crab scuttled by. A pair of birds danced in the sky. The lighthouse, in the distance, looked smaller now, more gentle, like a candle on a windowsill. He opened his hands to the breeze and just breathed as the sun climbed slowly behind the mist. He remembered something else, something he hadn't thought about in years. A letter he once wrote. Long ago, in his youth, during a difficult season, he too had placed a message in a bottle. A message not for anyone else, but for the sea. For the stars. For himself, he had written, "If ever you return this, I'll know I'm still seen." And now, had it come back? Maybe not the same bottle, maybe not the same ink, but perhaps the sea remembers more than we think. Elias stood and stretched, his bones making soft, familiar pops. He turned back toward the lighthouse, the sand giving way beneath him in soft whispers. He felt lighter than he had in weeks. The message wasn't just for him. It was for anyone who needed it. And tonight, before sleep, he would place it inside a new bottle. He would let the sea carry it again, Let it travel to someone else, someone waiting quietly at the edge of their world, someone still learning. They too are the lighthouse back at the tower. Elias placed the glass bottle on a shelf near the window. Next to a shell, next to a stone, next to a memory, the sea moved gently outside. The clouds shifted like dreams, and somewhere far beyond, perhaps another lighthouse glowed in the mist, its own keeper reading a message that felt like it had come from the stars. That night, sleep came easily, not because there were no questions left, but because Elias had stopped needing all the answers. Sometimes, peace isn't found in knowing everything. Sometimes, peace is found in knowing you're still here, still shining, still carrying light, even when the world is quiet, even when the sea forgets your name. The sea was still that night. The wind, barely a whisper, touched the lighthouse windows with gentle fingertips. The moon hung like a pearl, low in the sky, half veiled in clouds that moved slowly like drifting memories. Elias sat by the window, a book open on his lap, though he hadn't turned a page in nearly half an hour. His eyes were lost in the rhythm of the tide. He was thinking of the message, and the bottle, and all the unspoken things the sea might still hold. Then somewhere, between one breath and the next, his eyes grew heavy. The lines on the page blurred like mist. The world softened, and he drifted in his dream. Elias was walking beneath the sea, not swimming, not sinking, just walking, as if the ocean floor were a quiet path meant for wandering. The water was warm and clear, and above him, the surface shimmered like a sky made of glass. There was no weight on his shoulders, no fear in his heart. His feet left soft impressions in the sand as he moved forward, following something he didn't quite understand but trusted completely. A light was waiting far ahead, soft, steady, golden as he walked. Sea creatures passed, him by none afraid, none in a hurry. A school of fish shimmered like silver leaves caught in a breeze. A curious sea turtle floated beside him for a while, looking at Elias with eyes full of calm knowing, then drifted off into the blue. The path ahead curved gently like a dream, and still the light called him. It wasn't bright, not like a flame, not like a beacon. It was more like a heartbeat, a memory, something quietly alive. Then, between two towering coral reefs, he saw it. A lantern, nestled in a small bed of seagrass, glowing softly. The glass was old, covered in moss and time. Yet the light inside pulsed gently, as if waiting for him. Elias. knelt before it. As he reached out to touch it, a warmth bloomed in his chest, not from the lantern, but from within himself. The light didn't burn, it welcomed, and when his fingers brushed the metal handle, the lantern flickered once, then opened. Not in the way a lantern opens, but in the way a flower might bloom, in the way a story might begin. The light unfolded into colors: soft blues, quiet greens, golds like honey in morning tea. And within it, Elias saw something that took his breath away. Memories, not his own, but of the world. He saw a child holding her father's hand at the edge of a cliff, laughing. Into the wind, he saw an old woman lighting a candle for someone she had loved and lost. He saw two friends sitting beneath a tree, saying nothing and saying everything. Moments of love, moments of light, moments carried by the sea. Elias realized something then. The lantern wasn't showing him strangers, it was showing him the pieces of light we leave behind, the kindnesses, the quiet hopes, the silent courage of those who keep going, even when no one sees. The sea had been gathering them, not as treasure, but as truth. The lantern dimmed gently and closed. Its task was done. Elias stood, feeling changed. Not in a grand way, but in a deeper, stiller way. Like something had been returned to him that he hadn't known was missing. He bowed his head. Not out of habit, but out of gratitude. And as he turned to walk back, the path behind him lit softly, each step glowing for a moment before fading into silence. The sea was watching. The sea was remembering when he woke. The sky was just beginning to lighten. Birdsong touched the horizon like soft brushstrokes. The fire in the hearth had gone out sometime during the night, but the room was still warm with something more than heat. Elias sat up slowly. He felt whole. Not because anything had changed in the world, but because something had changed inside him. He rose and walked to the window. The waves were calm. The tide had pulled back, revealing smooth rocks along the shore. And then he saw it, a shape in the distance. Not a boat, not driftwood, another bottle. This one was darker, tinted blue, and it glinted in the early light, like a secret waiting to be discovered. He made his way down the familiar path, his steps unhurried, as if the earth itself had memorized his rhythm. The bottle sat nestled between seaweed and stone, just as the last had. Inside, a note. Back in the lighthouse, Elias opened it. The parchment inside was folded in half, and on it, in that same delicate hand, just 3 lines. The sea remembers, so must we. Keep the lantern lit. Ilya smiled. The dream had not been just a dream. The light beneath the waves had been real in the only way that mattered. And now it had become part of his world, part of his watch, part of the story he would keep telling. That night, he lit a lantern of his own. He placed it by the window not because ships were near, but because someone, somewhere, might be walking in the dark. And every light, no matter how small, has a voice, a promise. You are not alone. The lighthouse stood quiet beneath a silver sky. The sea whispered softly against the rocks, and the wind moved like a lullaby, wrapping the house in its gentle hum. It was a night where the world felt closer, smaller, like everything had taken a deep breath and sighed into peace. Ilya sat by the lantern he had placed on the windowsill. Its glow was soft and golden, like a memory come home. Outside, stars shimmered across the surface of the sea, mirrored in the still water like scattered petals. It had been many weeks since the first bottle, and still, they came. One after another, small messages, carefully written, sealed with care. No names, no return addresses, only thoughts, only truths. Only the kind of things one sends to the sea when no one else is listening. Some were stories, some were wishes. Some were confessions written by hands that trembled, but all of them were real. Elias had read them by firelight, sometimes aloud, sometimes in silence. He had learned to recognize the handwriting, to feel the rhythm of different voices. Some returned again and again like friends who passed by just to say hello. Others sent just one note, but even one was enough. One evening, he received a message that simply read, "I haven't spoken to anyone in 3 days, but I know the ocean heard me. Thank you for the light." Elias had placed that note above his desk, and every time he doubted whether the light mattered, whether the quiet hours spent beside the sea meant anything, he read it again. The ocean was not empty, and neither was he. That night, the fire flickered low, and Elias poured himself a cup of chamomile tea. He sat in his favorite chair, the one near the window, the one with the cushion that sank just right. His wool blanket lay across his knees, and the scent of lavender drifted from the drying herbs above the hearth. He closed his eyes. He wasn't tired in the way that begged for sleep. He was tired in the way that long walks make you tired. In the way that hearts grow quiet after they've been heard. As the wind nudged the glass, Elias found himself remembering the first time he saw the lighthouse, the way the ocean greeted him not with a roar, but with a welcome, the dreams. The lantern beneath the waves, The truth that stories never stay buried if you learn to listen. And he thought of you. Yes, you. The listener. The dreamer. The soul resting quietly at the end of another long day. He imagined you curled up under a soft blanket. The light from a small lamp painting gold across your room. He imagined the weight of your day slipping off your shoulders like an old coat. He imagined your breath deepening, slowing, letting go. Elias smiled. He didn't know your name. He didn't need to, because even across great distances, even separated by time and tide, one thing was always true. Light calls to light, and in that knowing there was peace. Outside, the moon began its slow climb. The lantern's glow danced gently on the window pane, and the sea whispered one final story, a lullaby, meant not for waking, but for rest. A lullaby that said, "You are safe. You are seen. You are part of something quiet and vast and beautiful." Elias rose, walked to the small shelf by the door, and pulled out a fresh piece of parchment. He dipped his pen, and he wrote, "For the one who listens with their whole heart. For the one who carries light, even in the dark. You are never alone. This story is yours, now too." He rolled the note, gently, sealed it, and placed it in the last bottle he had. Then he stepped outside into the cool night. The stars watched quietly as he walked to the edge of the sea. The waves reached forward, brushing the sand as if to greet him. And with a soft exhale, he let the bottle go. It floated gently, carried by the tide. Slowly pulled into the arms of the horizon. He stood there for a long time, not waiting, not expecting, just trusting. Back in the lighthouse, Elias extinguished the lantern, but the light remained in the warmth of the room, in the stillness of his chest, in the echo of every story told and heard. He climbed into bed, pulled the blanket around him, closed his eyes, and the last thing he heard was not the wind, not the waves, but a voice. Yours saying, "I remember."